There we go. Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. So nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones too. We are so pleased to have Brian Morrissey here with us today to give his artist talk. Just a few housekeeping notes. I am recording this call and you are all on mute automatically just to keep the background noise down. So if you want to say something or ask a question or anything, you can just take yourself off mute before you do so. I am very briefly going to read an introduction to Brian, and then I am going to just hand things over to him to give his talk. So, without further ado, I will read a little introduction. Brian Morrissey grew up in Wisconsin and had a love of art from an early age. Studying at the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh and at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, Brian came to Aix-en-Provence to study at the Leo Marchutz School of Painting and Drawing in the fall and winter of 1978 and 79. After graduating from college, Brian returned to Aix and the Leo Marchutz School for a summer of study and adventure, reuniting with teachers and friends. From the beginning, Brian's work has explored different mediums, styles, and themes. Personal work, commercial work, graphics, commissioned portraits, illustration, imagined landscapes all have had a place in his work and career. In his own words, Brian says that since his year with the Marchutz School, all of his different work has been influenced by what he learned there. Brian currently lives in Connecticut with his family. And with that, I will hand things over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Rose, for inviting me to do this artist talk. I've watched quite a few of them and enjoyed them very much. Um, Way back in the fall of '78, after I was at Marchutz for a couple of months, it slowly began to dawn on me what an impact it was going to have. I didn't know then that all these years later it was going to be resonating in my life and work even more. And even though I hadn't had any contact with the school for about 40 years, I'd thought of it often and never forgot about the teachings that I learned there. Um, yeah, I was lucky to have a career in art and design. And even though my work doesn't always look like the things I was endeavoring to learn at Marchutz, um, they're always in my mind. And I know that it influenced almost everything I did, even in those various pursuits in my career. So, as we know, after I went back in the summer of '81, and after '81, they closed for a few years, and I basically lost track of the school and lost track of a few of my friends after a few years. And then last summer, via their excellent website, I emailed an appreciation kind of into the ether and got a very warm and wonderful response from Rose, welcoming me back in a sense. Um, and last November at their museum seminar in Boston, I joined them for an afternoon where I got to meet Rose in person, meet Kathleen, reconnect with Alan, which was joyous after a long time. And and then here we are. Now, as I say, my work doesn't always look what I learned there, but my premise today is that the things that I did learn there, the harmonious rapport of the shadows, the relationships of the parts, um, what to leave out, what to leave in, complementary colors, all of that resonates, as most of you know, with so many other things in our lives. And along the way, I kept up with a lot of personal work, and that definitely reflects what I learned at Marchutz from painting in plein air, listening to great teachers, looking at impressionists and other masters. Um, so my work has been kind of diverse. I've been fortunate in it, and almost everything is reflected in what I learned from Billy and Sam and Alan and John along the way, and the fact that they were nice people, smart, warm, generous, kind, and encouraging was all just a bonus. Um, so in assembling images today of what to show, there's obviously a variety of ways to do it. I thought one way would be to just assemble a couple of dozen images that I thought you might appreciate the most, but I'm taking a different tact and doing it more the way that Alan did with his, and that is it's spanned decades, And my work will speak for itself, either well or ill. But I guess what I can then add is the journey along the way. And so I'm going to show a lot of slides, kind of quickly. We can linger at a few, or we can go back to a few. But I think what I can contribute today is more the narrative along the way of journey of this particular artist. So my dad was an artist, as Rose mentioned, doing commercial art and advertising, but he also liked to paint on the side, realistic painting. So I was lucky to grow up in that environment where um, having art around and that process was kind of normal and encouraged. And so uh, I recently went looking a bit in my old sketchbooks and allow me to share these. Uh, as I say, this thinking about this the last few weeks, it was also interesting for me to go back and look at some things I hadn't looked at in many decades. So when I was 13, I found these in my old sketchbooks. For some reason, there was a lot of images of babies. I'm not sure why. In hindsight, I can see that they were kind of a precursor to a lot of things I did moving forward. Um, but for the next few years I drew a lot, and over time by the time I got to say first year in college, I had done quite a bit of these realistic pencil drawings, working from photographs. Um, I knew even then that this was not really art in the truest sense, and there's more to it than copying photographs. But it was how I was learning. So obviously I dived in, made some progress. Um, Varying degrees of success, and this was really about all I did for a few years. Um, After a couple of years of college in Wisconsin, I went to Steamboat Springs and ski bummed for a winter with a friend, continued to do these drawings there, kind of with a Western theme for a lot of it, for that Western town, thinking maybe I could sell them to local places and things like that. Um, Uh, when I went back to, or during that winter, I went to the library and looked at art schools and things and decided to go to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And both at Oshkosh and there, figure drawing starting to loosen me up quite a bit. Um, my first year at art school in Minneapolis, I found this old drawing, and this detail on the right is it's the book The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung. I'd kind of forgotten that, but even then I was very interested in the psychology of things. Um, and Jung talked about, although I don't remember it really well, but he talked about dichotomy of the individual and society and that relationship, and the light and dark side of people's personalities, which he called shadows, and good versus evil, and all those kind of things. So even then, I was interested in things that were hidden or the inner workings. Um, I spent a year and a half in Minneapolis then. Then I took another half year off and went back to ski in Colorado. I see from this work in Minneapolis, it all seems kind of dark, and that strikes me as funny now, but that's what it was. So I went back to Colorado, and during that winter, went to the library and looked in a book about art schools in Europe. And one had this little paragraph about the Marchutz school. Um, didn't say much, but it was in the south of France. I had taken high school French, and I thought that might be a learning opportunity also. So I wrote them a letter, longhand, as one did then. Got this nice response from Denise, who I understand from Rose is still uh, part of the whole thing. Um, and and then that fall began to take my first trip out of uh, out of the country. Now, I'll say briefly that was a tough beginning. I flew at age 22, landed in Luxembourg, tried my high school French to figure out about the night train to Marseille. Um, I did that, so I checked my bags in the baggage place, just had my backpack. I was tired from the traveling, the layover in Chicago, all those things. On the train, probably leaving at 10 at night, I found an empty car that sat about seven people. A little intimidated, a little frightened, but happy to have that night alone to sleep. And 10 minutes out, the first stop from that station, five men got in, probably from, I thought they were Algerian, didn't really speak the language with bottles of wine. And so they spent the whole night carousing. So, with me sitting in the corner of that car. So I got to Marseille the next day and went to the baggage arrivals and found out that no, it wasn't like a plane. You don't check your bags and expect them to be there when you arrive. So I was dealing with the people in the station. While waiting, I saw a man die of a heart attack while his wife was kneeling beside him. I kept going back to the baggage place and they were saying, come back a little later. And then later they said, come back this afternoon. And then I went back in the afternoon. They said, probably tomorrow. So I found a little hotel in Marseille with a bare light bulb and broken sink, and landlord had yelled at me for some reason I didn't quite understand. Um, I went back to the station. They said, check this afternoon. By that afternoon, they said, maybe tomorrow. So at that point, I had had enough of Marseille. Um, that afternoon, while waiting around trying to figure this out, I'd seen a guy who had I'd seen him walk back and forth a few times. He came over to me and spoke in French if I wanted to go get a drink. So I thought, well, okay, that's friendly. Here's an opportunity to practice some French and things like that. So he let me out of the station. We walked a couple of blocks, um, and he led me to this underground passage, cement, where he had a mattress and some books and a bottle of wine and a few clothes. And I was thinking, I thought he was going to take me to a cafe to get a drink or a mimosa or something. So I quickly realized this was not what I had anticipated and ran out of there. Um, on the notebook I still have, I wrote X and I hitchhiked there. It was a Sunday afternoon. I walked around, still a little intimidated by the whole thing. The map that Denise provided, I went to where the school was. I rang the buzzer. I didn't expect anyone to be there on a Sunday, but they buzzed me up. I knocked on the door, meekly said, Je suis étudiant ici. And a guy with a black beard and a big smile said, welcome. And Alan, I'll be forever grateful for that. He and John were there hanging stuff up, and the rest was uh, the rest was beautiful. So there's that famous van that I got carsick in more than once on those early travels on the winding roads. Um, and so it began. I lived on Ruvenel with another student, a guy named Jim, who was 41 at the time, but a great guy. And coming to the school, which I hadn't known much about, I was handicapped more than most in that I had spent a few years already drawing, year and a half in art school. I quickly realized I had a lot to unlearn. Um, I did very few good paintings that that year. Uh, I'm sure of that. I did perhaps a couple. This motif that you know so well may have been one of them. It was our spring trip to Venice, where for the first time I really felt like I was getting it, the flow of it. I stood on the bridge overlooking this motif that I forget, which I'm sure you also know well. Um, and it was an hour standing there where everything for the first time flowed. I didn't think about it. The strokes came out. I remember painting with my fingers at some point, and remains a painting I like today. I would probably take back a few strokes now if I could, but that wasn't the point. I realized after a few months that this was going to be different. Um, During one weekend that spring, I did a copy while there. Again, it was hard for me to give up the detailed, stiff pencil drawings that I had known, and I think I chose this to copy, being a little more what I was used to rather than a Cezanne or a Pizarro or something at the time. But it was all a great learning experience. I did a lot of loose work for the first time, sketching, learning along the way. I loved the approach of the school where it was not only about studying art history, learning to see, but it was traveling, going to the countryside, reading books such as Flannery O'Connor and Van Gogh's letters, really studying paintings for the first time. I think this was the next summer. That's Helen and Geza, a couple of my friends. The detail of that van is in this painting with my friend Laurie there. I don't remember that. Some of the students lived there. That some of you may be familiar with that building. So it was a fantastic, fantastic year at X. I went back to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I remember I had to look at I had to write a long essay to try and justify why I should get some credits for my year in France because it wasn't a exchange program or anything. I just had done it kind of on a whim to explore, but so I had to explain why all my work was little, while it was all impressionistic, why it hardly contained anything post 1900. Because where I was the Minneapolis was a present day art school, very big on ideas, concepts, novelty. But I did manage to get across that I learned more in a year than I did in 3.5 years of college. This was an assignment where teachers took a Polaroid, asked to do a self-portrait by it, and it was another moment where from that Polaroid things just to fall into place without much struggle. Those moments of flow, as we know, are rare, uh, but it's great when they occur. So I graduated during that next year, went back to my hometown. At 24, didn't quite know what to do, but I didn't really want to get a real job, so I did a lot of artwork, portraits. I sometimes went to galleries with their permission, would set up, invite people to come in, and I would do 20-minute drawings. Um, I did a lot of that. Somehow obviously people like portraits of their kids, so I ended up doing a lot of that, which, 10 years after that first sketchbook. I didn't give up on my earlier style, but started to refine it and do things like this, thinking I could sell these at places, but also just being attracted to the work. It really wasn't about selling, it was still about learning to draw. Um, with those still interested in psychological things and things hidden, I was attracted to doing things like this. I guess, again, talking about those things that Jung had 10 years prior of individual in relation to society and things like that. I also love to read, was an avid collector of books, and did portraits from photos, obviously, of Shaw and Henry Miller, Bertrand Russell. It was this time when I got in a band for the first time. We weren't very good, but it was a great learning experience, and this happened to be the back cover that I did of our locally 500 copies of an album, of which we probably still have 300 in storage somewhere. I also did portraits of friends from life. This was from my grandfather, who was about 82 at the time and lived a block away from where I did. This was from a photo that I took. This is also he, and frankly, this, because of what I had learned over the last few years in an X, means more to me. While there is craft perhaps in something like this, uh, something done in a session in fewer strokes, which conveys a meaning, um, still means more to me, and I can see the difference. Uh,
Brian, sorry, what's the
sure.
medium that you're using for those incredible, the one before that?
This
Yeah,
is
what?
simply pencil on a Reeves BFK paper, which is how I worked a lot of that. It's pencil with a stump, so a lot of blending. And you'll see, I mean, I've continued to do that for decades off and on while doing other things. Uh, and beyond that, I'm not quite sure what to say about it. Obviously, I had an attraction to it. They don't always turn out. I think the key is, if you're doing very fine strokes, you still have to keep track of, and they take a few days or sessions to do. Still have
Yeah,
to
how
keep
long?
track. Um, Something like this, probably over the course of 3 or 4 days, few hours at a time. Um,
Wow.
but even
Incredible.
if you're like looking at a mountain and doing an hour-long session, uh, one has to keep track of the whole. So, I mean, and one of the things I learned from you guys was that even while bringing this up, tend to work on the whole piece, bringing up gradually. It's not like I would finish the glasses and then work on another part. It's the process was bringing things up continually and again trying to be true to what's essential, what's superfluous, harmonious rapport of the shadows and all that to bring the form together. Um, Also, I'll say, Alan, it was never about photorealism to me. Um, it was always about a more organic process, a more organic drawing, and taking liberties from the photo, trying to bring it more into alignment with those things we had learned. I did a lot of pastel on paper at the same time, did a lot in sketchbooks, which of course was a great process. I find I haven't done that as much in recent decades, and looking back, I'd like to correct that because there's no more important thing to the process than those things which aren't about having final product. It's about the process. Um, it's the Polish pianist Paderewski. We're again alternating between things like this and a much freer stroke was part of my learning process. Um, these, again, you'll see for some reason I've got a lot of things where people are backlit. I guess my attraction to the shadows, things hidden, finding what can describe form in a few strokes. These, in hindsight, reminded me a bit of Seurat and his rough Conti-Cran drawings. Um, Again, things like this, even though detailed, it's not so much about the detail to me as it is about the quality of light and shadow. So during the same time, I did a lot of paintings of simply skies, probably a couple of dozen of these, where um, I'd simply do a sky from imagination. Eventually, little bits of landscape would start to creep up at the bottom. For me, it was about one doing kind of having a loose stroke, being able to create a painting in a matter of hours. Um, One, of course, has to look at a lot of nature to be able to to imitate her in her manner of operation when not looking at it. Um, at that time, I had a little studio in our downtown. It happened to be above a gallery, so I did have a couple of art shows there, um, and a nice little studio, but studio for the first time, really. And you'll see I had one later, but it reminds me that in the 45 years of painting, I probably had studios, maybe 6 or 7 of those years, and the other 40, like most of us, were working from a drawing board or the kitchen table or in a bedroom. So Studios are great. It's no excuse to not work if you don't have one. Um, Again, I was interested, obviously, in people, but not necessarily the surface of things so much, but some implied mystery. But also, from what I learned, I next did scenes on plein air, a view of a railroad trestle in my hometown. Liked working with pastels at this point, but also for the 4 or 5 years I was in Wisconsin then, plus one more winter of skiing in Colorado. Um, I was trying to avoid a real job, make a meager living from doing artwork, so I did a lot of advertising for local businesses. Again, commissions, portraits, sold things at a couple of shows. It wasn't much, but it was enough at the time. From the photos I'd taken when I was an ex, this is Barrage de Bimo. I did a few of these, I think, partly to explore watercolor some more, partly to relive those beautiful scenes, the beautiful light of Aix-en-Provence, um, a local scene. So, as you see, for me, it was always not finding a balance, but doing kind of rough impressionistic work was as important or equally important as doing more realistic things. Um, and I never put much distinction between them. It all really seemed like the same process to me. So the week I turned 30, I moved to New York for a variety of reasons, but it was interesting. I figured I'd go for a year and try it out and see what happened. Um, and for me, it wasn't so much about the skyscrapers and things like that, but I did find beauty in some of the lesser spots in Williamsburg and Jersey City and things like that. These always struck me as a little opera-esque. Um, I had the chance to learn lithography at one point, and I did only two or three in that process. These were a couple of those, which I liked very much. One of my jobs in um, early days of New York was my first was working the night shift at a soldier, sailors, and airmen's club for $5.50 an hour, a place where military people could come for stay for $10 a night. So I often worked the night shift where people would buzz in, drunken sailors at 3 in the morning, and do that. It was kind of grim, but it was New York, and I did what I had to do. Another job was working for a move up was working for a big stockbroking broker firm downtown or in Midtown, where I was literally the assistant at lunch and would fill the coffee machines and kitchen for the stockbrokers. But why I took it was the CEO there had one of the best collections in the world of WPA prints. So for a year and a half, besides my day job, I would go in early and catalog, manage, and hang his fantastic collection of mainly lithographs from WPA era. So that was great to work with that, and I got inspired to try a couple of those. But of course, I had no need to make prints at the time, and having the equipment was not easy, so that didn't last too long. So my first couple of years in New York were tough. This big painting maybe symbolizes a bit what was happening with my career at the time. I did keep working though, and the spring of '87, I think it was, I answered an ad in the New York Times, as one did. They were looking for artists at the Museum of Natural History. So it had not occurred to me to look at museums. I visited there, but getting a job there didn't really, I don't know why that didn't really click. But at that time, a shorter portfolio, got in, and almost immediately found it was a perfect fit for me. I stumbled upon it, but spent basically the next 10 years there in the exhibition department with like-minded artists working with curators and scientists, anthropologists, doing everything from dusting the elephants to graphic design, illustration, painting, building exhibits. It was a fantastic experience, and I'm so lucky I found it. It involved a lot of illustration, a lot of carpentry, um, a lot of work with scientists. These are pterodactyls flying. It had a lot of concepts for exhibits coming up. I mean, one thing great about it was that so much of it was aligned with things that I was interested in, of exhibits about climate change, about endangered species, that often new illustrations to envision how something would look. Um, Even sometimes colleagues would point out to me in these fairly straightforward things, I would often throw in a little mysterious, unnecessary element to it. Not by planning, but in hindsight, I can see what they meant. It was also working with scientists to uh, do things like reconstruction of extinct animals. This was Legosudis, a early proto-dinosaur, which they had little skeletons. So working with some masters there, learned how to presume what it might have looked like in life. For an endangered species exhibition, someone wrote a script and I got to work on kind of a kid's book about a fictional flying frog, which which was a way to illustrate the Endangered Species Act. I was kind of like this uh, woman in a canoe for its stroke and light and feeling. As I say, I got to do a variety of things there for a show about Ernest Shackleton and his Antarctic expedition in about 1914. You may be familiar where his ship of about 35 people got stuck in the ice, marooned. Their goal was to walk across Antarctica. The ship was stranded, stuck, eventually crushed. They spent the next 2 years getting back to civilization. I still think it's the greatest adventure and survival story that I've ever read. But this was a big piece. Did a little model for it. It ended up being in etched glass with a Dremel tool and sandblasting to give an image of that ship trapped in the ice. All the while I was doing personal work, continuing what I had learned of pastels of the countryside, up in the Catskills, not too far from here. Continued with sketchbooks, mainly for ideas, some of which came to fruition, some of which never did. Again, working about reconstructions of prehistoric animals. This was Scaridia, a mammal lived about 30 million years ago. And the scientists, in finding skeletons all in a certain place, theorized that they were killed off suddenly by toxic fumaroles, toxic gases from volcanoes and the like, sometimes from lakes. So, with their help, theorized this scene of those animals succumbing to those toxic gases 30 million years ago. It's my sister's house in Big Bear. Um, I should talk a little bit because you'll see more of it of working on black paper. Now, I tried this early on just kind of as an experiment. Um, I knew from the start it's dangerous because it could be very kitschy. On one extreme, it could be Elvis on black velvet. So I tried to guard against that. But at the same time, what I found is that just the way that a white paper or canvas, artists so often use the white of the canvas to tie things together or to be the light of it. Um, I found or attempted to use the black of the drawings to speak for themselves, to be the shadows, and try to make that part of the harmony. Also, because of the boldness of it, I think it made me often be more bold in my stroke and in my colors to balance out those extremes. Again, in natural history, theorizing mammoths long ago. Now, while I was in at natural history, I for the first time found a great studio. I lived in a loft in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. This was one step on the subway from Manhattan. So a couple years after I left, it became very trendy. But these were in the days when it was not. It was still a very industrial warehouse area. The building that I lived in was a storage place for spices. So I would sometimes be walking through town or through something, and people would smell it on my coat and say, "You must live in that spice building." And for years after, my clothing, my books would be permeated with those spices. I had been inured to it after a while, but I understood it. So it was a great studio. It did not have heat on weekends. It wasn't zoned for commercial, so the landlords didn't have to do that. Um, it had bad water pressure, but everything I owned was in one big room, and I loved it. Luckily, there was a rare free public pool a block away where I went to shower every day and learned to be a lap swimmer along the way. Um, so these are fairly big drawings on black in that studio. I like this quote from Degas. Painting requires a little mystery, some vagueness, and some fantasy. When you always make your meaning plain, you end up boring people. I had a big wall, so I did a lot of big pencil drawing, sometimes realistic, sometimes exploring, which I don't know particularly where that one was going, but it was all part of the process. These are 6 feet tall, for better or worse, just again, I think for the process of learning, for a variety of strokes, kind of a scribble technique, a big Conti crayon technique. You'll see more of those. Back in my day job in natural history, did a lot of variety of things. This, pardon me for this sacrilegious one of Grant Wood, one of the curators in our Hall of Human Biology. Um, there's a little diorama of a skeleton family sitting around their room, and they wanted this to be a painting on their wall. So did this. It was a nice chance to copy a Grant Wood. Also did more for the Hall of Human Biology, did more faces in etched glass, which was interesting because had to define a form and in many cases a likeness, or it was of physiognomies around the world using just 3 tones. So I would have to do 3 different masks, and then a sandblasting company would use those masks, and by the depth of the sandblasting would create different tones to define the form. Mastodons showing how 12,000 years ago New York was under 1,000 feet of ice. So at the same time, I was seeing good illustration in kids' books, and I thought, well, that attracts me. So over the next half dozen, maybe 10 years, I did a lot of kids' book illustration. It attracted me because of the story, the use of words. I was trying to write the stories and do the illustrations at the same time. I did probably a half dozen full stories and book dummies. It's a tough nut to crack. A lot of people trying to get into that business. I submitted a lot of work, got a lot of rejections, never really made much headway, but I love the process and so have no regrets about it. I remember taking this about Great Big Bob to an art director. She looked at my dozen drawings and said, "Well, they look a little bit stiff." In my mind, I'm thinking, well, it's a plastic doll. Of course they're stiff. Um, more things about the bug boy. Uh, One of the great things about this is working from imagination, and I'll talk a little about that. Um, in that, obviously, you have to have looked at nature a lot to be able to use imagination, and it took a long time for me to get more comfortable with that, but also requires a lot of sketching to figure out composition, light sources, where shadows would fall, uh, working towards the whole. So the fact that that's all a process to come up with the final image was fun. Um, this one of the highlights of natural history was a trip to the Central African Republic for a month in the rainforest to collect information, insects and plants to recreate a big diorama back at the museum. Um, Before this, Marseille had probably been the most exotic place I had been to. So this was fantastic. We got to work with pygmies who helped us collect leaf litter and information in the jungle. We worked with a local village. We had a three-man video crew there. Because I spoke adequate French, I was often the translator. This had been a French colony, so they spoke French along with the African language. This man in blue is the mayor of Bayanga, village of 3,000, seeing himself on videotape for the first time in his life. Uh, it was incredible. We came back, those few of my colleagues working in the jungle. That's a whole story in itself, but one of the advantages of working for a place like that. Um, Continued to do landscapes from life. Scenes often from Vermont or the Catskills. Worked a lot on watercolors, although obviously, as many of you know, it's a very challenging medium. There's very little time for correction, but it helped me with my process of trying to see things clearly and do them in a few strokes without a lot of thinking. Did architectural things along the way, which don't have a lot of soul, but it all gets back to seeing, figuring out what's essential and what is not. Continued to do big drawings. Um, this is a scene from Hawaii where I've never been, but my sister had. She had some photographs I was very attracted to. So in this, I like the boldness on the black canvas, the color and the stroke of it. Of all a lot of my pieces, this remains one of my favorites. Did a lot of landscape paintings, 3, 4 feet big, some from imagination, some from life, some from photos. Series of panels up in the Catskills, which was a commission which created about a 20-foot long panorama. Big acrylic scene from the Catskills. Did a lot of big landscapes from imagination, um, concerned with skies, sometimes concerned with implications about society. This one called Weekend Retreat. This one called The Colony. Uh, this is called The Farm. I realize I'm going quickly through these and my narrative's taking a while, but we'll get there. I suppose it was inevitable that with my interest in kids' books and skies, this would eventually happen. I'm sorry about that. Not really because they adorn a lot of kids' bedrooms, but uh, it is what it is. And then during the final chapters, in 2000 or around the turn of the century, I got a job at the Bronx Zoo, which turned out to be another dream job. Zoos can have a bad reputation, which 80, 100 years ago is well deserved. But what I found that where I was at the Bronx Zoo, which was part of the Wildlife Conservation Society, um, it really is about working around the world conserving natural habitats, uh, preserving endangered species, um, advocating for those things. Yes, they display animals, but in these days, it's no longer ever animals taken out of the wild. They're all the zoos now have animals only bred in captivity in reasonably naturalistic settings, things like that. But it was a great experience. I got to do a lot of illustrations for the Natural History magazine. Um, During the time, snuck in portraits finally of my own kids, which 30 years before had been babies out of Good Housekeeping magazine. Got to do a lot of concepts about how interactive things would look. Again, how exhibits would be beforehand. This is, in one sense, to sometimes sell the idea to other staff members or to contributors. Got to work on a lot of natural history things. Of course, the process still involved a lot of sketching, building the whole. One of my favorite projects there was the world's first bug carousel. They wanted to have a carousel, which of course was a little bit cliched, but they thought it would be a moneymaker for them. They decided the world's first bug carousel, which is of course an underrepresented species in the world for all that it is. And this was one of my projects where I got to help conceive it, do drawings for it. Eventually, a company in Ohio was one of the last that still carves these out of wood rather than do fiberglass molds. Um, Concepts of buildings in place before they would actually be there, envisioning what that would be like, envisioning what those insect rides would be. And my daughter, then about 3, got to be one of the first to test that out. In 2008, I got laid off from the zoo when the economy went bad. Their funding dried up, as did my projects. So during that year, I did some freelance. I did have a show. Now, I haven't exhibited often, maybe a half dozen times at a couple of small galleries, at libraries, sometimes coffee shops. It was never really my muse, and I also knew that my work being in so many different directions was not particularly marketable to gallery curators and things like that. But if I could curate things myself and show that eclectic things, it worked out nicely. I show this in part to show the scale of those, some of the big pencil drawings, of which I probably did about 20, and to remind myself that if I know I'm going to be having my picture taken, to have better posture. Now, briefly, I'll talk about this. Along the way, I said, just by my nature, I involved into a designer. Early on, I learned CAD, computer assisted drafting. 6 months would go by and I would fall behind in that technology. I soon gave it up, realizing that I really had no affinity towards it anyway, because I like doing things by hand. Doing these pencil on paper had a pleasure to it. Was and I really got to find this rewarding. Again, the way it relates to the things I learned at Marchutz were it's about communicating, it's about knowing what's important, what's superfluous, how much information is necessary, um, how the whole is going to work together. I'll say I had a pet peeve when I worked at a small exhibit company for 3 years in the private sector. The designers there would design the way that some things look. They would design the outside of things. And I would think and sometimes share with them, well, that's just how it looks. How is it going to get built? And this relates to what I know Leo had talked about. You've got to find the core of something. You've got to work from the inside out. And having done a lot of building and natural history at this point, I would have to think of not how it looks, but how is the thing going to be built? What's the efficiency of materials? What's the sequence of it being built? And find ways to impart that kind of information. Whereas if you're just showing the carpenters, for example, how it looks on the outside. You're leaving a lot to chance. You're leaving a lot to their own interpretation, things like that. So I got to do hundreds of these over the last 20 years, and they remain rewarding to me, even though it's different than working from nature. Um, Worked at aquariums for freelance projects, and then the last 10 years I worked at kids museums, um, which particularly one kids museum here in Connecticut, which led to a lot of wacky but interesting stuff, and including building a lot of things, which I quite enjoyed, from invented instruments to a big labyrinth to uh, full-size igloos carved out of styrofoam. Um, and even building things gets to back to Marchutzian philosophy about working from the inside out, what's necessary, what's superfluous, and how structurally it's all going to work together. Recently, for a friend's website, he asked me to do images promoting kind of funny images promoting what his services were, and so uh, I think of these on the opposite end of doing a very detailed, realistic drawing, of having to communicate something in just a few strokes or a very simple image. Now, I like to try and relate this back to Leo's um, figure drawings, where we would use very few strokes to show the relationships, to show something happening. I confess, back when I was there, I didn't quite get that stuff from Leo, nor in the beginning did I get Cezanne or Van Gogh or Pizarro or Sisley or others that I now love. So while this is not Leo, I related back to, uh, that's kind of what he was doing, and appreciated even more for that. Um, Again, a lot of design and seeing things before they're actually in front of you. Now, I'll end on this. This was a big landscape painting. It was commissioned from about a year ago. I hadn't painted big landscapes for maybe 15 years, and it showed. I dived in, I put it aside. I procrastinated for months. I started and stopped. It was a struggle. It had no deadline. I slowly got to, it had no flow to it. I slowly got to wrangle it into have some sense of cohesion. And towards the end, I started to feel that. But what it did is remind me that to find that flow, you can't wait for the inspiration. You've got to dive in, struggle with it if that's what it takes. Um, in this case, I hadn't done it for a while. It took a long time to feel, just to get the stroke back. Um, it's not one of the best, but I use little things I learned from Marchutz long ago, how a little touch of red can help complement a whole field of green. But I use it to summarize that just keep working often. The more you do it, the more often you'll get that flow. You'll get the harmonious rapport of the shadows, and uh, and that's that. Keep working, and uh, those are my slides. So thanks very much for hearing so much biographical stuff along with the images.
Thank you, Brian. Let's give Brian a little virtual round of applause. Thank you so much.
You're
And
welcome.
now I would love to open it up to questions and
God.
discussion. And you all can feel free. You can either like raise your hand like this and I can call on you, or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question or a comment. Um, Go ahead. Kathleen, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to say that was the most delightful. I've had a lot of good hours this week, and that was the most delightful hour I've had. Thank you so much. It was
I'm
beautiful.
glad. Thank you.
So wonderful, Brian. I have a quick question for you. It was so great to see how your art has changed and stayed the same throughout your career when you're doing different, when your art is needed in different ways, when you're doing it for work or for your own pleasure. I have a question now. You've told me that you're now retired for the last couple of years. I wonder what your art practice looks like now, that you're retired.
It's interesting. After I stopped working almost 5 years ago now, I did a lot of freelance for a year or two. I wasn't really seeking it out, and I'm not really seeking it out now. As I've mentioned, probably right now I'm doing less artwork than I have for the last 45 years, but I feel strong it's really just a pause, and that soon I'll get back into doing probably a lot of big landscape painting in a more impressionistic style, because that in my heart is what I feel the best about when it succeeds. As you know, the last couple of years I'm doing a lot of time with music, writing songs and recording them. So I feel like that's taken a lot of uh, is a great creative outlet for me, just as a hobby. But I'm not doing a lot of work now, so I'm kind of curious to see how the next 20 years will transpire as well. But I'll say along the way, that all that work, a lot of commissions, a lot of things for different purposes than simply looking at nature. I liked that challenge, which is why I didn't often turn down things or things I hadn't done before. I would welcome, because it all was a challenge to how can I employ these Marchutzian philosophies to something which on the surface is unrelated.
Hmm, I love that. Thank you. Other questions for Brian or comments?
Brian, hi.
Hi,
God, that's
Alan.
incredible. My God, what a career. What a life.
I've been very fortunate and I don't take it for granted.
Just so beautiful. Just your life in New York and everything that you've done in terms of first of all, your incredible talent to do these kinds of drawings that you do. And I actually saw in them, I don't know if we can go back to the images, but one thing I saw over and over again in all the different things, especially a lot of the images of the people
Right,
earlier, or even in this image, that
right.
you have a draw toward what do you call it? Sort of contre-jour shadow against the light that's behind with the shadow in the front. A lot of those beautiful drawings of the people where they're kind of dark, or either their backs turned and they're in the dark, and then you have light
Hmm.
behind them, is something I find really that's like that. Yes, that. Um, I see that over and over again in a lot of your work, that way that you're trying to find a certain mystery uh, in the way that you put the painting together with the shadow being on the front and the light behind. I mean, is that something that's conscious to you, or
Uh, Not so conscious. I'm aware of doing it, but I think I'm simply attracted to that. I don't know
yeah,
if it it's related a little bit to things that Rembrandt did with a lot of his darks and a lot of things
right.
in shadow. A little bit what, as I mentioned, these strike me a little bit of what Seurat did in um, his Conti crayon on rough paper
Hmm.
drawings. So it wasn't necessarily a goal, but I agree, for whatever reason I'm drawn to that, and I found it funny that looking in that very early work and reading Carl Jung's talk about the inner self and shadows and all of that. It remains, yeah, I see how it always remained a theme, but it does get back to what Leo and Cezanne and others talked about, was
Hmm.
how things, how you can draw with light, and it's the shadows what really show the form.
Yeah, those are incredible. And even if you go back earlier,
Hmm.
you have a lot of I don't know exactly where. Let me just see if I can see the little ones. Uh, no, it was earlier. The people in the museum when you had a lot of your museum draw when you were
Yeah,
drawing in the museum with people in the museum.
right.
But in a lot of the images, it just keeps coming up. You're sort of this relationship to shadow. You're very interested in.
Right. I mean, there were these things which are drawn with, three tones, and the shadow being the the dark behind. Um, oh, there are these.
Wait, what is that? 58 there. What is that? That one.
Oh,
58. Yeah, that one. Yeah. Again,
oh,
I just find it really interesting that the animals are sort of in the dark and the snow is the light behind the animals that are in the dark rather than the animals sort of being light. Just the way that's almost like a contre-jour. You're looking into the sun kind of
yeah.
image right
Oh,
there.
and,
Because
and
it's contre-jour. It's very
yes,
interesting.
and that's a good point, Alan, because this obviously had to be from imagination. So
Uh-huh.
I probably looked at snow. I looked at previous images of mammoths, but compositionally and otherwise, I guess I had to kind of invent that without really thinking that it was what you're saying at that time.
Hmm. Wonderful. Yeah. And what's the one right above it? Right? The same kind of thing happening there, right? Actually,
Yeah, right. With the
I mean, it's a lighting effect, but the foreground, you know, the foreground's usually, you make a foreground and the foreground's lighter than what's in the middle tone, et cetera, et cetera. But here, again, that's almost like a contre-jour because you've got this dark shadow, and then the house comes out of that light, that dark that you have in the front. I just find seems like you're really interested in shadow.
yes, and I think that also is partly why I was attracted to working on black paper from time to time is
Huh?
those shadows are a given and you work on everything but. So, this is
Mhm.
obviously just the black paper working there. And
Yeah.
you have to draw the light and in working on white, it's the other way around in a sense, but it's still finding a way to make them work together.
Mhm. Lovely. Other questions for Brian? I know we're past now the hour. Oh yeah, Jackie, go ahead, please. You'll just have to unmute yourself first.
Yes, thank you. Oh, I'm fascinated with everything. But what is the media of this particular paint? What media did you use on black paper?
Most often pastel,
Mhm.
as this one is, which I also like because, and probably one of the reasons I jumped around is obviously working with pencil is very different than working with a piece of chalk, and working with other mediums than pencil. Something like pastel kind of forced me to be uh, bolder in stroke and and impression, and not as easy to get caught up in detail. And so that was often a good medium for me to try and not get trapped into focusing on the non-essential.
Okay, well, thank you so much for a fascinating program.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Brian, I
Jackie.
would love to see, one of your big portraits that you did. I would love to see sort of 15 photographs of what the drawing looked like in the beginning over the period of time that you did it. That would be fascinating to see that.
Good point. Uh, I could assemble that sometime for you. That'd be interesting to me too. But that's a good point. And as I alluded to, that's tricky with working big. And those big heads, I'll say, of course, there's precedent
Incredible.
for that. Um, Particularly the American artist Chuck Close, who worked a lot in the 70s and 80s and did these airbrushed, very big heads
Mhm.
that he would grit up and airbrush very meticulously. I'll say that was never my goal or the intent of that. I never, those big heads never gritted them up. I always started with a sketch and tried to
Yeah.
work them up little by little so that they wouldn't they wouldn't fall into that trap of being something mechanical.
Mhm. That'd be lovely to see. Sort of the
Thank you.
first day, second day, third day, fourth
Yeah.
day, final.
Our
Oh,
paths will cross again, and I'll keep that in
yeah.
mind. Thank you.
Pamela, did you have a question? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
not a question exactly, but I just wanted to say how thrilled I am to have caught this event and heard your story and seen your work. It's fabulous, and quite envious of all of a lot of your dream jobs as they were mine, and very impressed that you are such an eclectic artist and you followed that, versus, I guess, following the pressure of kind of the bigger art world, which does tend to push people in one direction, or artists in one direction to be commercially successful. And you've done that and had this fabulous career and fed your family, obviously, and I had all these adventures, and I'm just like blown away. So thank you for sharing this.
Thank you, Pamela. I'll say briefly that uh, Ellen talked about talent, which I believe counts for maybe 5% of someone's work. A lot of people have talent. I was lucky enough that for whatever reason I stuck with it and did it pretty consistently. I also knew early on, especially I went to New York, that the gallery scene was not for me, nor was I probably for them. I knew that freelance illustration would be a constant hustle, which wasn't to my taste either. Um, I often really just work for the pleasure of the process, and I like sharing the product with people, but I like the process, and that's why I was so lucky to stumble into the museum world where I got to do a variety of things. If I had not gone to Marchutz and not stumbled upon some great jobs that fit my personality, I'm not sure what my work would be. It might still be those stiff drawings I was doing at age 19.
Mm, lovely. Any last questions or comments for Brian before we wrap things up today? You can feel free to just shout out. You'll just have to take yourself off mute. Well, we are a little past the hour, so maybe we can just wrap up here. And everyone, I would love to do another little round of applause for Brian. Thank you so much, Brian, for taking the time to put together such a lovely presentation. It's so great to see all your work throughout the years, and so good to have you as part of the community with the Marchutz School. We're so grateful to you.
Thank
Thank
you all
you.
for showing up, and Rose and Alan, Kathleen, and the rest, thank you for welcoming me back, and we'll continue. I hope to visit you in the not too distant future, and probably in New York in a fall seminar or something. So thank you.
Wonderful. We look forward to it, Brian. Thank you so much. And thank you,
Okay.
everyone, for joining us today. So good to see you all. And take care. Talk to you all
Bye.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.